I'm open to practically any question. If somebody wants to know something, I'm happy to tell them about it. And if you ask 50 animators how they approach a scene, you'll get 50 different answers. When I got into the animation medium, I didn't go through any formal training programs at Disney or any of that kind of stuff. I kind of learned by doing, and I learned by associating with people who could teach me stuff. My biggest mentor was Richard Williams. I started working for him on a film called Raggedy Ann and Andy in the mid-70s. And, you know, he was also the world's greatest animation student himself. So he would get a scene of Milt Kahl's from Jungle Book and flip it for us and show us where the breakdowns were and how that worked. You know, when I worked for him in London, you know, he had stellar animators there like Art Babbitt and Ken Harris, and I would learn from them. They would give me advice on whatever stupid animation I was doing for a TV commercial, but they take every piece of animation seriously and give you knowledge that you were able to utilize. And to have that kind of interaction with those guys, I think is very, very valuable. And even at, say, something like the Disney training programs, the people who come into them still get one-on-one mentorship. You know, they'll still be assigned a mentor. Even though they might be doing a communal project where somebody might be an animator, somebody might be a rigger, somebody might be a lighter, so on and so forth. You're paired with somebody who's an expert in that field, and you're getting to learn from them about that specific thing. You're also learning in that kind of an atmosphere how to do several things at once. Okay, you're good at rigging? Great. Are you good at modeling? Okay, good. You can model too. And so on and so forth. So that, you know, it's kind of guerrilla filmmaking in the training program a lot of the time. But I didn't go through any formal apprenticeship. You know, I learned by doing, and I learned from the feet of the veterans who I admired. When I got involved with Richard Williams, first of all, I had already known his work for several years. I'd seen documentaries about him. I always followed his movie titles quite religiously, and he was doing titles for films like Casino Royale and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and his magnificent etching crosshatch animation for The Charge of the Light Brigade. So I already knew who Dick Williams was. And a friend of mine was telling me that they were gearing up for a crew on Raggedy Ann and Andy while I was still halfway through my junior year going to college at Pratt Institute in New York. So I thought, oh my gosh, here's my chance to work with this guy that I admire so much. So I went over and did a portfolio review with him, which was probably the world's dumbest portfolio review. There's no such thing as, you know, your laptop, here, take a look at my work here, or, you know, just connect to my website. None of that. I'm lugging a Super 8 projector with my reels falling all over the floor, and flip books, and everything else that could possibly go wrong went wrong. But fortunately, Dick saw enough in my work to give me a chance and hired me anyway, despite the, you know, ridiculousness of the portfolio review. He saw enough in my work that he wanted to give me a shot. So, and I will forever appreciate that. And I learned so much from Dick, and I learned so much from the atmosphere that Dick created. You know, he fostered animation talent. He was one of those guys who could recognize nascent talent. These days, with the pressure on a lot of animators to produce very, very quickly, especially in the realm of features, they're looking for people who are pretty perfect right off the bat, you know, when they're crewing up. Dick could recognize nascent talent and know that if he nurtured it, it could develop into something. And a lot of people don't take the time to do that, and Dick did. So I was very, very fortunate to learn in that kind of an atmosphere. You can learn technique, you can learn animation programs, but learning to observe and learning to actually create characters that people want to spend some time with and stories that people are interested in, that's stuff that you can't really read in a book. That's stuff that has to come from you as a particular artist, or you paired with other artists, and what that collaboration might bring. Because after all, animation is a very, very collaborative medium. It has to be. And I think when people ask me questions, it's usually not very technical. It's usually about how do you come up with a character? How do you first start? And I think maybe that's the thing that is of the most value, is what's your starting point, you know? And a lot depends on the circumstances of the particular film you're working on, what the tone of the film is, what the content is, how the characters are meant to relate to one another. And so the starting point is somewhat different for practically every film. But at least I'm old enough now that I can actually give people some examples of things that I've worked on. And even if I can't codify it into a rule, it's still something where I can say, well, when we were on Aladdin, we did this. When we were on Pocahontas, we did this. When we were on Wreck-It Ralph, we did this. And that common experience is something that's of value to, you know, people who are just starting to get into the medium. It's actually very hard for me to disentangle my personal likes from my professional duties. I have been very fortunate in being able to satisfy a lot of my personal artistic goals in the realm of making professional animation in the marketplace, which is not something a lot of people get to do. You know, when we did Rhapsody in Blue for Fantasia 2000, that was my dream project for years. How often does it come up that you get to do your dream project on somebody else's dime and get supported by by an entire studio? That is very rare. So I count myself very lucky that I've had those kinds of opportunities. You know, truth be told, I work hard enough that I don't have a lot of outside time for hobbies and extracurricular activities. There are, of course, tons of artists who inspire me and whose work I will constantly look at. I mean, I could start rattling them off, but you would be here all day. I mean, you know, top of the list are people like Al Hirschfeld, Chuck Jones, Mary Blair, Tex Avery, Bob Clampett, you know, and Frank and Ollie, and Milt Kahl, and Freddie Moore, and you know, you got me started. So it's the kind of thing where I'm constantly going back to the well and marveling at what these people have accomplished and trying to understand what it is that they brought to the table. And sometimes it's just intuitive. Sometimes you can't codify it. You can't scientifically talk about Mary Blair's color sense, you know, but boy, did she know how to put colors together like nobody else ever. And that's amazing. You can look at what she's done, you can observe what she's done, and understand how the colors work together and where she has used value in order to help things read better and so on and so forth. But it wasn't a scientific process. It was an intelligent process. She would certainly make artistic choices that were based on her artistic intuitions and knowledge. You know, and she was actually a fine traditional watercolorist before she started doing, you know, her very designy work for the animation studios. And so she has that kind of background, much in the same way that Pablo Picasso was a great traditional draftsman and painter, before he went abstract. You know, when you know what the reality is, you know what you can abstract. You know, when you don't know what the reality is, then you're just kind of stabbing in the dark. And I think that kind of educational grounding is key to the people who have made a very unique stamp on the art world or on the animation world. You know, they have that kind of knowledge. Some people are just naturals. You know, that does happen once in a while. But looking at the work of the people that I admire and understanding just by repetition of seeing their work and observing it and seeing the details, you know, gives me not just a great deal of pleasure, but gives me a lot of information. I can understand how Ken Harris would approach a scene based on, first of all, being able to talk with him firsthand, and second of all, observing so much of his animation over the years and understanding that's the approach he was talking about and he used it in this scene. You know, it's just connecting all the dots. It's almost like a detective story, putting all the pieces together to understand somebody's artistic output. You know, finding your artistic signature isn't something that I think you can go for in a calculated or concerted effort way. I think it happens over time. I never even knew I had a signature until people told me I did. And that's kind of interesting because I always thought I was doing my best to honor my heroes in animation. But they recognize me within my work, which is pretty amazing. Even just in the still drawings, you know, we had Al Hirschfeld out to the studio after Aladdin had been done, and they took him to the Animation Research Library, and they were showing him my genie drawings. And, you know, when I met up with him again later in the day, I said, well, I hope you saw, you know, all the influence that you had on the character, because it was huge. He said, yes, but I saw you in it as well. And he didn't even know me that well at that point, but he could recognize that 20% that you're talking about, that an artist will bring to the table practically subconsciously. And as you develop a body of work, people start to recognize that as your signature. And one thing that's interesting about the medium of animation in developing a signature is that it isn't just how you draw. It's how you time, it's how you space, it's how you articulate movement, it's how you show weight. It's all of those things that add up to an animation signature that isn't just about the physical qualities of a drawing. Yeah, everything. Just the way you do an eye blink. You know, one of the things that was the most interesting to me when working at Richard Williams is they had some very inventive animators there. I used to room with Russell Hall, who went on to animate Jessica Rabbit in Roger Rabbit, and he was always very, very experimental in the commercials that he was doing. He did a series of commercials for cotton buds in England, which are like Q-tips, okay? Johnson's Cotton Buds, with this little baby character who was appealing to mums to use cotton buds in their most important little places. And as he was animating this, he developed a different eye blink. As the character was emoting, the eye blink was actually just one line that was a slash across his head rather than two eyes closing. And the way he made it move, it was so convincing and looked so good. I just marveled, and I just thought, here's a guy who's created a different eye blink. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that great? He did a commercial that was supposed to be done in the style of the painter Turner, and it was a sea in the middle of a storm, a tempest. And he got the most amazing effects of the sea foaming, you know, and roiling away during this storm with scumbled magic marker on cell. You'd never believe it. It just looks like a moving Turner painting. And the guy was amazing. That's one of the things that was great about the atmosphere at Richard Williams, and he engendered it himself. Anything that would stick to a cell was valid, you know, artistically. Dick did commercials where he actually did oil painting on cells. You know, we used to animate in grease pencil on cell. So, you know, I would bring back supplies from New York, you know, that they hadn't seen in London, and we would start using them and bringing them into the studio for rendering techniques. You know, we would start using Sharpies to animate certain jobs if you wanted something that looked like a squiggly ink line. There's all sorts of different things that you would do where you were not hampered by a particular technique or a medium that had already been set in stone. You would do anything to make the art work as animation. You know, getting past roadblocks, at least for me, is sometimes just walking away from it. You know, I'll get into a situation where I've been working on a scene and I know there's elements that aren't working in it, and I'll dutifully try and correct as much as I can as I'm working on it, you know, to see if I can salvage what I've done, and it's almost always the wrong approach. You know, I'll get to a certain point in the salvage routine where I'll just go and throw them out and start fresh. You know, it's the kind of thing where a fresh take is probably the thing that gets me out of a rut the most completely and efficiently. Just taking a deep breath and saying, I'm not trying to save any of the work that I've done previously on this scene. I'm going to approach it differently. And that's one thing that kind of gets me out of those ruts. And everybody has them. Everybody has artistic blocks. But for the most part, the thing that keeps me going and keeps me fertile is that every job, no matter how large or small, has its challenges. Every job has something in particular about it that's unique, that warrants your exploration into it and warrants your attention into solving those particular problems. One of the things that was great about animating the genie was that every scene was an interesting animation exercise. Oh, I get to animate him like Groucho Marx in this scene. I get to animate him like Ed Sullivan in this scene. And everything was an interesting exercise in terms of, okay, how do I make it look like the genie and make him move like Groucho Marx? and that's an interesting challenge, you know. Those are the kinds of things that excite me. How do you animate a massive alligator who's a big sissy when he encounters a pricker bush? You know, it's those kinds of character conception challenges and animation challenges that I hope will keep me fertile and imaginative for the rest of my career. CTN is the best place for people of like mind in the animation medium to come together, because you've got so much energy happening here. You've got the energy of the young people wanting to learn and wanting to be inspired. You've got the energy of the seasoned veterans who want to give back, who want to actually tell people about the things that they've discovered and the things that they've learned. You know, there's a shop-worn phrase, pay it forward. But I really do believe in that, because I was the beneficiary of seasoned veterans paying it forward to me when I was first getting started in the medium. And to have a venue like this where it embraces all forms of animation. Nobody's saying, oh, CG is better than 2D, is better than stop motion, is better than cutouts, is better than flash. It embraces all forms of the medium.